Sir, are you cold? Annie's voice was soft, careful, as she stood looking down at the man collapsed on the sidewalk. He lay curled on his side, knees pulled tight to his chest, arms wrapped around himself as if he could hold his body together by force alone. The man stirred. A violent shiver ran through him, followed by a rough cough that tore out of his chest. He coughed again, then again, the sound dry and helpless. He lifted one trembling hand to his mouth, trying to stop it, but his whole body shook. "I'm fine," he whispered automatically. The words were a lie, and both of them knew it. Annie took a step closer. Her eyes moved over him slowly, the way children look when they are trying to understand something that scares them but doesn't stop them. "You're not fine," she said. "You're shaking." He tried to push himself up. His arm gave way, and he sank back down with a quiet grunt. Another cough bent him forward, stealing what little breath he had. Annie didn't ask again. She didn't wait. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small paper bag, folded neatly at the top. Grease had soaked through the paper. She held it with both hands, like something precious, and extended it toward him. "Here," she said. "You can eat this." The man blinked slowly. The smell reached him before his thoughts caught up. Fried chicken. Warm. Real. His stomach clenched hard, a sharp, painful reminder of how long it had been. He shook his head at once. "No. No, sweetheart," he said, his voice hoarse. "That's yours." Annie didn't move the bag. "It's my dinner," she said. "But you can have it." "I can't," he said quickly, shaking his head again. The motion made him dizzy. "You need it more than I do," she frowned. "I already decided," she replied. "This is my last meal today, but that's okay." "Well, today." The words hit him harder than the cold ever had. "Your last meal?" he repeated quietly. She nodded. "I bought it with my saving money," she said. "I was going to eat it later. But you're really hungry." The man closed his eyes, his chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. When he opened them again, they were glassy. "I can't take the last meal from a child," he said, his voice breaking. "I won't." Annie crouched down beside him. She looked straight at his face, close enough now that he had to meet her eyes. "You're a person," she said simply. "People have to eat." He let out a shaky breath that turned into a quiet sob before he could stop it. He turned his head away, ashamed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Annie said right away. "Crying means it hurts." She leaned forward and pressed the paper bag into his hands. "Please," she said, "take it. I don't want you to fall asleep and not wake up." His fingers closed around the bag before his pride could stop them. His hands were shaking so badly that the paper crinkled loudly. "No one's ever—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "No one's ever done this for me." Annie tilted her head. "Why not?" "Why not?" He let out a weak, bitter laugh. "Because they don't see me as a person," he said. "They see me like this." He gestured weakly at himself. "Dirty. Broken. A homeless man they want gone." Annie's face tightened. "That's mean." "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." He stared down at the bag in his hands, his shoulders slumping inward. "I've never been treated like a normal person," he continued, the words spilling out now, raw and unguarded. "Not like this. People look at me and turn away. They act like I don't belong anywhere. Like I'm something wrong on the street." Annie reached out and touched his sleeve, just for a second. "You're not dirty," she said. "You're just cold and hungry." That was when he broke. A tear slipped free, then another. He bowed his head, clutching the bag as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know what this means." She nodded once, satisfied. "Eat," she said, "before it gets cold." He opened the bag carefully. His hands shook as he lifted a piece of chicken. He hesitated, then took a small bite. The taste hit him like a memory. Warmth spread through his chest, and his breath caught painfully. He chewed slowly, deliberately, forcing himself not to rush. Annie watched him closely. "Is it good?" Very good, he said, his voice thick. She smiled. See? I told you. He ate a little more, then paused, resting his hands in his lap. I used to have everything, he said suddenly, without looking at her. People listened to me. They smiled. They shook my hand. He swallowed. Now they won't even look at me. Annie thought about that. Maybe they forgot how, she said. He looked at her then, surprised. Forgot how to what? How to be nice, she replied. He nodded slowly. Maybe they did. When he had finished eating, Annie leaned back on her heels. My mom's right there, she said, pointing. She's watching. A woman stood a short distance away, her posture tense, eyes never leaving them. You don't need to bother her, the man said quickly. I'll be okay. Annie shook her head. You don't look okay yet. She hesitated, then asked softly. Do you have a place to go? The question settled heavily between them. He could have lied. He had lied before. But something in her eyes stopped him. No, he said. Annie didn't step back. She stood up and turned, running to her mother and grabbing her hand. Mom, she said urgently, pulling her closer. He's really hungry, and he doesn't have anywhere to go. The woman stopped a few steps away and looked at him. Her face was careful, protective, tired but not unkind. The man lowered his eyes, bracing himself for rejection. He had come to the street to learn how people treated a man with nothing. He had not expected a 6-year-old girl to give him her last meal and remind him what it felt like to be seen. As Annie stood between him and her mother, holding both their worlds together with small, determined hands, he understood something with painful clarity. For the first time in a very long time, someone had treated him like a human being, and he would never forget the child who did it. Annie stood between the man and her mother, her small body straight, her chin lifted with quiet determination. The paper bag lay empty now on the sidewalk, folded neatly the way she had taken it out of her pocket, as if it still mattered. Her mother tightened her grip on the grocery bags, eyes moving from the man to her daughter and back again. She had learned long ago to read situations quickly, to weigh danger against compassion, to listen not just to words, but to instincts sharpened by years of responsibility. How long have you been sitting here? She asked, her voice calm but firm. William looked up at her. He could see the tiredness in her eyes, the lines that spoke of work, worry, and a life lived without margin. He did not see fear there. He saw caution, and something else, humanity, struggling not to be reckless. Not long, he said, though they all knew it wasn't true. I don't mean to cause trouble. I was nodded no. You're not causing trouble, Annie said immediately, glancing back at her mother as if daring her to disagree. He was cold and hungry. Her mother sighed softly, the sound of someone who knew exactly how this would complicate her evening, and yet could not bring herself to turn away. She shifted the bags to one hand and stepped a little closer. What's your name? She asked him. William hesitated. The question was simple. Ordinary. It should not have felt dangerous. But names had weight. Names carried histories. He had given his up when he stepped onto the streets. William, he said finally. She nodded once. I'm Grace. This is Annie. I know, he said, glancing at the girl. She introduced herself without realizing it. Annie smiled, pleased. Grace studied him in silence for a few seconds. She noticed the way his hands still trembled, the way his shoulders hunched inward, as if bracing for a blow that hadn't come yet. She noticed the cough he tried to hide, the shallow breaths. You don't look well, she said. I'll be all right, William replied automatically. I didn't expect her to. He gestured weakly toward Annie. She shouldn't have given me her food. Grace's mouth tightened. That was her choice, she said. She's stubborn like that. Annie nodded proudly. I am. Grace looked at her daughter, then back at William. Do you have somewhere warm to go tonight? The question was asked gently, but it carried the weight of consequence. William knew what his answer would invite. He knew what it might cost her. No, he said. Grace exhaled slowly through her nose. She glanced up and down the sidewalk, then back at Annie, who was already reaching for her hand again. Mom, Annie said quietly. Not pulling this time. Just holding on. He's a person. The words landed heavier than any argument could have. If this moment touched your heart, take a second to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments right where you are watching. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us what humanity really means. Grace closed her eyes for a brief moment. In that instant, 1,000 calculations ran through her mind. Rent due in 2 weeks. A small apartment with thin walls. A child who trusted too easily. A man she did not know. She opened her eyes again. "All right," she said. "But just for tonight." William stiffened. "You don't have to." "I know," she interrupted. "But I am." He swallowed. Pride flared, weak and useless, then died. "Thank you," he said quietly. They walked together, Annie between them, swinging their joined hands as if this were the most natural thing in the world. William moved slowly, each step deliberate. Grace matched his pace without comment. The apartment was small, just as Annie had promised. Clean, but worn. A couch with a faded blanket draped over the back. A narrow kitchen where the light flickered when it was first turned on. Family photos on the wall, mostly of Annie at different ages, smiling wide and missing teeth. "Bathroom's there," Grace said, setting the groceries down. "You can wash up if you want." William hesitated at the doorway, staring at the sink as if it were something sacred. He rolled up his sleeves and turned on the water. The sight of his hands under the light startled him. They looked older than he remembered, rougher, stripped of the polish they once carried. When he returned, Annie had already climbed onto the couch, curling up with her blanket. Grace poured a glass of water and handed it to him. "You can sit," she said. He did, carefully, as if afraid of leaving a mark. They didn't talk much at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was tired. Honest. After a while, Grace asked, "How long have you been on the street?" William stared at the floor. "Long enough," he said. She nodded, accepting that answer for what it was. "People can be cruel," she said quietly, "especially when they think no one's watching." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "They treat me like I'm invisible," he said. "Or worse, like I don't deserve to exist. Like being poor makes me dirty." Grace looked at him sharply. "That's not true." "I know," he said. "But they don't." Annie stirred on the couch, eyes half open. "You're not dirty," she said sleepily. "You just needed dinner." Something twisted painfully in William's chest. That night, as Annie drifted fully to sleep and Grace set out an extra blanket, William lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the men who had laughed with him over expensive drinks, the donors who had praised his generosity, the friends who had vanished the moment he looked like this, and he thought about a 6-year-old girl who had given him her last meal without hesitation. For the first time since he had begun this self-imposed exile, William understood the full weight of what he had set out to learn. Not about poverty, not about kindness in theory, but about who people chose to be when there was nothing to gain. As sleep finally claimed him, one thought echoed quietly in his mind, heavy and unshakable. If a child could see his humanity so clearly, what excuse did the rest of the world have? William woke before dawn, disoriented by warmth. For a few seconds, he didn't move. He lay still on the floor, staring at a ceiling he didn't recognize, listening to sounds he hadn't heard in months. A refrigerator humming softly, a pipe clicking somewhere in the walls. The faint, steady rhythm of breathing that wasn't his own. He pulled the blanket closer around his shoulders. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and something sweet, something domestic. The realization settled slowly, and then all at once. He wasn't outside. His throat tightened. Carefully, so as not to wake anyone, William sat up. His joints protested, stiff from the cold nights he'd grown used to. But the pain was different here. Less sharp, less desperate. He rested his elbows on his knees and let his head drop forward. This was not part of the plan. He had told himself this experiment would be clean, controlled. He would observe, endure, learn. He would not interfere with lives that were already stretched thin. He would not accept shelter, not cross this line. And yet here he was, wrapped in a blanket given without condition, on the floor of a woman who had nothing to gain from helping him. From the couch came a small sound. Annie shifted in her sleep, turned onto her side, and hugged the blanket closer to her chest. One socked foot stuck out from beneath it. William watched her for a long moment. In boardrooms, people had spoken to him with careful respect. They had weighed every word, every smile, every gesture, hoping to stay on his good side. They had seen his influence before they had seen him. Annie had seen none of that. She had seen a man shaking on the ground and decided he mattered. The thought lodged deep in his chest. He rose slowly and padded toward the kitchen. The floor creaked beneath his weight. He froze, waiting. Nothing stirred. The kitchen light flickered on. He winced at the brightness and turned it down. Then stood there, uncertain, like a guest who didn't know the rules of the house. On the counter sat a folded receipt, a half-empty bag of groceries, a small plastic container with Annie's name written on it in marker. William poured himself a glass of water and drank it slowly. Each swallow felt like an apology. "You're up early." He turned to see Grace standing in the doorway, hair pulled back loosely, a sweater wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't look surprised to see him awake. "Just tired. I didn't mean to wake anyone," he said quickly. "You didn't," she replied. "I always wake up around this time." She crossed the kitchen and reached for the coffee maker, filling it with practiced motions. "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said, honestly. "Thank you. For last night." She nodded, as if gratitude were expected but not required. "Annie doesn't sleep well if she thinks someone's in trouble." He hesitated. "She gave me her last meal." "I know. She shouldn't have had to do that." Grace looked at him steadily. "She didn't have to," she said. "She wanted to." William lowered his gaze. "People don't usually want to help someone like me." Grace's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "Someone like you?" she asked. He gestured vaguely at himself. "Homeless, broke, a problem." She met his eyes. "You're a man who needed help." The simplicity of it left him speechless. Grace poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one toward him. He took it carefully, as if it might disappear. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why are you really out there?" The question was calm, not accusatory. Still, it sent a jolt through him. He had rehearsed answers for strangers, half-truths designed to deflect curiosity. None of them felt right here. "I wanted to know what would happen," he said slowly. "If I didn't have anything." Grace waited. "I used to have money," he continued, choosing each word with care. "Influence. People listened to me. They praised me. I started wondering if any of it was real." "And?" she asked. "And it wasn't," he said. "Not most of it. The moment I looked like this." He trailed off. Grace took a sip of her coffee. "People can be ugly when they think they don't need you." "Yes," he said. "They treated me like I was dirty, like I didn't deserve basic kindness." I whined. From the couch, Annie stirred again, rubbing her eyes as she sat up. "You're talking," she said sleepily. "Good morning, baby," Grace said. Annie slid off the couch and padded toward them. She looked at William, then smiled. "You stayed," she said. "I did," he replied. She seemed pleased by that. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in a long time." She nodded, as if that confirmed something important. "Good." Grace watched the exchange quietly. "Annie," she said, "go brush your teeth." Annie made a face but obeyed, disappearing down the hallway. When they were alone again, Grace spoke softly. "I don't know what you're running from," she said, "or what you're trying to prove. But my daughter doesn't see experiments. She sees people." William closed his eyes briefly. "I never meant to involve her." "I know," Grace said. "But you are now." He met her gaze. "I won't take advantage of your kindness." She studied him for a long moment. "Then don't," she said. "Stay for breakfast. Get your strength back. After that, we'll talk." Breakfast was simple. Toast, eggs. Annie insisted on cutting one slice of toast in half and pushing it onto William's plate. "You need it," she said, echoing her words from the night before. He didn't argue. As they ate, William felt something unfamiliar settle over him. Not relief, not comfort, responsibility. He had wanted to see the world without his wealth, stripped down to its moral core. What he hadn't anticipated was how heavy that knowledge would feel once he had it, because now he knew. He knew who turned away. He knew who pushed him out of alleys and laughed when he fell. and he knew that in a city of millions, the purest kindness he'd encountered had come from a child with almost nothing. As Annie chatted about school and Grace listened with half a smile, William made a decision, quiet, internal, but absolute. This story would not end the way his experiment had begun, and whatever came next, he would make sure that the little girl who gave him her last meal would never be invisible in a world that too easily forgot people like her. The day moved forward whether William was ready for it or not. After breakfast, Grace cleared the plates while Annie dragged her backpack from the bedroom, the zipper rasping loudly in the quiet apartment. She dropped it by the door and sat on the floor to put on her shoes, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "You're walking me to school, right?" Annie asked, not looking up. Grace paused. "We'll see." Annie looked at William. "You can come too," she said, as if the decision had already been made. "It's not far." William hesitated. The instinct to refuse rose quickly, sharp and practiced. He had learned to stay out of sight, to keep his head down, to avoid places where questions came easily. A school meant parents, teachers, neighbors. It meant being seen. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said carefully. "You won't," Annie replied. "You just walk." Grace studied him. He could feel the weight of her assessment, the silent questions she didn't voice. Finally, she nodded once. "All right," she said, "but we don't linger." The walk was short. The streets were already awake, filled with the rhythm of routine people heading to work, children moving in loose clusters, conversations overlapping without touching. William walked slightly behind Grace and Annie, aware of how he looked reflected in shop windows. The same worn coat, the same tired posture. He noticed the looks, some curious, some dismissive, some lingering just long enough to categorize him and move on. Annie didn't notice any of it. She skipped along beside her mother, talking about a spelling test she was worried about, and a girl in her class who never shared her crayons. At the school gate, Grace knelt to straighten Annie's jacket. "Be good," she said. "I always am," Annie replied solemnly. She turned to William. "You'll still be here later, right?" The question was innocent. The impact was not. "I will," he said, surprising himself with how easily the promise came. She smiled, waved, and disappeared into the building without another thought. Grace stood there for a moment, watching the doors close. Then she turned to him. "You don't have to wait around," she said. "I know this isn't. I want to," William said. "If that's okay." She nodded. "Come on. I have a shift. Do mine." Grace worked at a small neighborhood diner a few blocks away. William sat in a corner booth with a cup of coffee that was refilled without comment. He watched the flow of customers, listened to fragments of conversations. No one paid him much attention. A few glances, quickly dismissed. At one point, two men at the counter laughed loudly, their voices carrying. One of them glanced at William and lowered his voice, whispering something that made the other snort. William felt the familiar tightening in his chest. He looked down at his hands, at the faint stains that hadn't yet washed away. The urge to shrink, to disappear, came unbidden. Then he remembered Annie's voice. "You're a person." The shift ended in the early afternoon. Grace wiped her hands on her apron and joined him. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I just forgot how loud people can be." She gave a small, knowing smile. "You get used to it. We got it night." On the walk back to the apartment, Grace spoke again. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need an honest answer." William nodded. "How long do you plan on living like this?" He took a breath. "I don't know," he admitted. "It was supposed to be temporary, a way to understand something. And now, he said slowly, "I'm not sure I can walk away knowing what I know." Grace stopped walking. She faced him fully. "My daughter is not part of an experiment. I know," William said immediately. "And I swear to you, I would never use her or exploit her kindness. What she did." His voice faltered. It changed something. Grace studied his face. She wasn't looking for eloquence. She was looking for truth. "People like you," she said carefully. "They come through sometimes. They want to feel something. They want redemption. And then they leave. I'm not asking to stay forever, William said. Just long enough to do this right. And what is right? She asked. He didn't answer immediately, because he didn't yet have words for it. He only knew the shape of the obligation forming inside him. That afternoon, Annie came home flushed and talkative, spilling stories as she kicked off her shoes. She stopped short when she saw William still there. You didn't leave, she said, pleased. I told you I wouldn't, he replied. She nodded, satisfied, and went to wash her hands without another thought. That evening, as Annie colored at the table and Grace cooked, William sat quietly, absorbing the ordinary sounds of a life lived without spectacle. A pot boiling, a cartoon playing softly, laughter over something small. Later, when Annie was asleep again, Grace sat across from him. You said people treated you like you didn't matter, she said. Yes, they treated me like that too, she said quietly. Just differently. Being poor does that. Being a black woman does that. Being tired all the time does that. William listened. I don't need saving. Grace continued. And neither does my daughter. What we need is respect, he nodded. You have it. Good, she said. Because if you're going to be here, that's the minimum. That night, William lay awake on the floor again, staring at the ceiling. But this time, his thoughts were sharper, more focused. Faces came to him. Names. Systems, the way money could close doors or open them. He had walked away from his world to see what remained. Now he knew. And he also knew that understanding alone was not enough. The question was no longer whether the world was cruel without money. The question was what he would do with the knowledge he had paid for in cold nights and hunger, and whether he could ever return to being the man he was before. The first sign that the past had not fully let go of William came in the form of a familiar voice. He was standing outside the diner near the end of Grace's shift, watching the afternoon thin into evening, when he heard someone say his name, his real name spoken with disbelief and a sharp edge of curiosity. William, he turned slowly. The man standing a few feet away wore a tailored coat and expensive shoes that were far too clean for the sidewalk. His hair was perfectly combed, his posture relaxed in the way of someone who had never needed to brace himself against the world. Recognition dawned on his face, followed almost immediately by something colder. I'll be damned, the man said. It is you. William said nothing. You disappeared, the man continued, stepping closer. No calls, no explanation. We thought you'd finally cracked. William studied him quietly. He remembered the name. He remembered the dinners, the laughter, the casual cruelty disguised as jokes. This man had once raised a glass in his honor. I didn't disappear, William said. I stepped away. The man's eyes flicked over him, his coat, his shoes, the faint bruise of exhaustion beneath his eyes. Looks like you fell. Grace came out of the diner then, wiping her hands on her apron. She took in the scene at once. The stranger, the tension, the way William's shoulders had stiffened. Everything okay? She asked. The man glanced at her, then back at William, a smile tugging at his mouth. Friend of yours? Yes, Grace said simply. The man laughed softly. Funny. You never did mix with people like this. Something in William shifted. He felt the old instinct rise, the one that told him to correct the narrative, to reclaim the upper hand, to remind this man exactly who he was dealing with. He didn't. I'm busy, William said. If you'll excuse me, the man scoffed. Busy doing what? Slumming it? Playing martyr? William met his gaze. Learning. The smile vanished. You always did have a flair for drama. Grace stepped closer, placing herself just slightly in front of William. He said he's busy, she said. You should go. The man looked at her, surprised, then irritated. This doesn't concern you. It does, she replied. You're standing too close to my friend. The word friend landed with quiet force. The man shook his head, backing away. You've really lost your mind, he said to William. When you're done pretending, you know where to find us. As he walked away, William felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief. Something firmer. Resolve. Grace watched the man disappear down the street. Who was that? Someone who used to think I mattered. William said. She nodded. People like that don't like mirrors. That night, Annie noticed something was different. She was coloring at the table, her tongue peeking out in concentration, when she looked up at William. "You look sad again," she said. He smiled faintly. "Do I?" She nodded. Not the crying sad, the thinking sad. He considered that. "I ran into someone from my old life today." She thought about it. "Did they share their food?" "No." "Then they weren't very nice," she concluded, returning to her coloring. William laughed quietly. "You have a way of simplifying things." It helps," she said. Later, after Annie was asleep, Grace sat across from him at the small table. "That man," she said. "He didn't treat you well." "No," William agreed. "He treated me the way he always did. I just didn't notice before." Grace folded her hands. "You're carrying a lot," she said. "Guilt, anger, whatever this is you're trying to fix." "I know," William said. "I just don't know how to put it down." Grace looked at him steadily. "You don't owe us anything." "Oh, I know," he said. "But I owe something to the truth." She leaned back slightly. "And what is that truth?" "That the world rewards power and punishes vulnerability," he said. "And that kindness survives in places it's never acknowledged." Grace considered that. "Then what are you going to do with that knowledge?" William didn't answer right away. He thought of Annie's small hands pressing food into his, of the way Grace had stepped between him and a man who still thought money decided worth. "I'm going to make sure this doesn't end as a story people forget," he said. Grace's eyes narrowed slightly. "Careful," she warned. "Stories can turn people into symbols. I won't let that happen to my daughter." "I wouldn't either," William said. "If I do anything, it will be quiet." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Where?" Over the next few days, William began to notice patterns he had once been insulated from. The way the landlord spoke to Grace on the phone. The way teachers sent notes home assuming negligence rather than exhaustion. The way police cars slowed just a little too much on their street. He listened more than he spoke. Annie accepted his presence as a constant now. She showed him her homework, insisted he taste her cereal to see if it was still good, asked him endless questions about places he had been without caring whether they were impressive. One afternoon, she asked, "Were you rich?" The question was blunt, unafraid. "Yes," he said. "Like, a lot?" "Yes," she nodded, processing. "Did it make you happy?" He thought about it. "It made things easy," he said. "But it didn't make me kind." She frowned. "Why not?" "I didn't have to be," he admitted. She considered that, then said, "You're nicer now." The honesty stung. "Thank you," he said. That night, lying awake again, William stared at the ceiling and understood something that had eluded him for years. Losing his money hadn't shown him how cruel the world could be. He had always known that, in theory. What it had shown him was how selective his empathy had been, and that was a debt he intended to repay. The knock on the door came just after sunset. Grace was at the stove, stirring a pot of soup, while Annie sat at the table humming to herself, lining up crayons by color. William was folding a blanket on the couch, the quiet rhythm of the apartment settling into something that almost felt permanent. The knock was sharp, deliberate. Grace stiffened. She wiped her hands on a towel and glanced at William before moving toward the door. "Stay here," she murmured, though she didn't wait for agreement. She opened it only halfway. A man stood in the hallway wearing a dark jacket and an expression that suggested impatience masquerading as authority. He glanced past Grace, his eyes briefly scanning the apartment. "Evening," he said. "I'm looking for a man matching a certain description." Grace didn't move. "You found the wrong place." William felt his chest tighten. He recognized the look. He had seen it before on security teams, on auditors, on people who believed answers were owed to them simply because they asked. "What description?" Grace asked. "Older, white, rough shape," the man said. "Been hanging around the block, causing concern." "Concern for who?" Grace replied. The man shifted his weight. "Neighbors, business owners. He's been seen sleeping outside, asking for food." Grace crossed her arms. "So has half the city." The man's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, if you're harboring Annie slid off her chair and walked into the hallway, peeking around Grace's leg. "He's not bad," she said. The man looked down, startled. "Sweetheart, this doesn't involve you." "Yes, it does," Annie said, serious. "He's our friend." Grace felt something harden inside her. "You need to leave," she said firmly. "Now." William stepped forward then, his heart pounding. He raised his hands slightly, a universal gesture of surrender. "I'll go," he said. "I don't want to cause trouble." Grace turned sharply. "No." The man smiled thinly. "That would make things easier." William met his gaze. "I haven't done anything wrong." "That's not how this works," the man replied. Annie grabbed William's hand without looking back. Her grip was small but fierce. "He's staying," she said. The hallway went quiet. The man looked from Annie to Grace to William, clearly reassessing. He exhaled through his nose. "This isn't over," he said finally. "People are watching." Grace didn't flinch. "So am I." The door closed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Annie was the first to break the silence. "That man was rude," she said. Grace let out a shaky breath and knelt in front of her daughter. "You shouldn't have come to the door. He was talking about him," Annie said, nodding toward William. "That's not fair." Grace hugged her tightly. "You're right, but sometimes being right can be dangerous." Why? William felt the weight of those words settle heavily on him. Later, after Annie was asleep, Grace sat at the table, her soup untouched. "That's what I was afraid of," she said quietly. "I'll leave," William said immediately. "Tonight, if you want." Grace looked at him, tired and angry and protective all at once. "You shouldn't have to," she said. "But my daughter shouldn't be scared either." "She wasn't scared," William replied. "She was angry." Grace gave a humorless smile. "She learned that from me." William leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "This was never meant to affect anyone but me." Grace met his eyes. "Intentions don't cancel consequences." He nodded. "I know." Silence stretched between them. "I need to tell you something," William said finally. "Something important." Grace waited. "My name is William Carter," he said. "And before all this, I was very wealthy." She didn't react the way he expected. No shock, no disbelief, just a slow, measured breath. "I figured," she said. He blinked. "You did?" "People don't unlearn the world that fast," she replied. "You listen too carefully. You carry yourself like someone who used to be heard." William let out a quiet laugh. "I'm not broke," he continued. "Not really. This was a choice." Grace's jaw tightened. "A choice?" "Yes," he said. "A test. To see how people treat a man without money." "And?" she asked. "And they treat him like he's disposable," William said. "Except your daughter." Grace sat back, absorbing that. "So what happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you," he said. "I don't want to hurt your family. I don't want Annie dragged into something she didn't ask for." Grace stared at the table for a long moment. Then she looked up. "You don't get to decide alone," she said. "Not anymore." William nodded. "You're right." Grace stood and walked to the window, peering out at the street. "I don't need a savior," she said, "and I won't let my child become a lesson for someone else's conscience." "I wouldn't ask that," William said. "But I do want to make things better." Quietly, respectfully, Grace turned back to him. "Then start by understanding this," she said. "Power doesn't just come from money. It comes from not being afraid to look away." William felt the truth of it sink in. That night, sleep didn't come easily. William lay on the floor again, staring at the ceiling, replaying the man's words in the hallway. People are watching. He had wanted to see the world as it was without his influence. Now the world was pushing back, and for the first time, he understood that stepping into invisibility had not removed his responsibility. It had sharpened it. If he stayed, he would bring danger. If he left, he would confirm what the world already believed, that people like Grace and Annie were on their own. By morning, he knew he would have to choose, and whatever choice he made next would ripple far beyond a single sidewalk, a single meal, or a single act of kindness. William made his choice before the sun fully rose. He lay awake on the floor long after the apartment had gone quiet again, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and the softer, closer sounds of sleep. Annie's steady breathing from the couch, Grace's muted steps once in the night when she checked the lock on the door. He thought about the man in the hallway, about the way authority leaned on people who already carried too much weight. He thought about the ease with which danger drifted toward those without buffers. By morning, he understood something he had resisted since the beginning. Walking away would be safer for them. Staying would be truer. He rose quietly and stood by the window, watching the light creep along the opposite building. In his mind, he set rules, clear ones, boundaries that would protect Grace and Annie from the consequences of his presence. If he stayed, he would stay carefully. He would listen more than he acted. He would not invite attention, and when he did act, it would be on their terms, not his. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Grace stood there with 2 mugs, her face drawn but resolved. "You're up early," she said. "So are you," he replied. She handed him a mug and leaned against the counter. "I didn't sleep much. Neither did I." They stood in silence for a moment, the steam curling between them. "I'm not leaving," William said finally. He held her gaze. "Not without your consent, and not in a way that puts you or Annie at risk." Grace took a slow sip of her coffee. "You don't get to promise risk away," she said. "But you do get to decide how honest you're going to be." He nodded. "I'll be honest." "Good," she said. "Then be honest about this. What happens if someone else comes knocking?" "I'll answer," William said. "I won't hide behind you. I won't let your home be treated like a target." Grace studied him. "And if answering makes things worse, then I'll leave," he said. "On my own, quietly." She set her mug down. "Annie doesn't do quiet goodbyes." "I know," he said softly. Annie patted in then, rubbing her eyes, her hair tangled from sleep. She looked at both of them and sensed the seriousness immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing's wrong," Grace said. "We're just talking." Annie looked at William. "Are you leaving?" The question was small and direct, the way children ask things that matter. "No," William said. "Not today." She nodded, satisfied enough for now. "Okay, then I need breakfast. Later." As they walked Annie to school again, William noticed the same looks from passers-by, but they no longer felt abstract. Each glance now carried a calculation. How much danger did it bring with it? How much indifference? At the school gate, Annie hugged him without warning. "Don't forget," she said. "You promised." "I promised," he replied. Grace watched them, her expression unreadable. When Annie ran inside, Grace turned to him. "If you're staying," she said. "You're not staying as a guest." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means you pull your weight," she said. "You don't play savior. You don't make decisions for us. And you don't pretend you understand what it's like to live here just because you slept on the floor." "I wouldn't dare," William said. "Good," she replied. "Then come help me." The day unfolded with ordinary tasks. Grocery shopping on a tight budget. A visit to the pharmacy where Grace debated which items could wait until next week. William carried bags and listened. He learned the names of neighbors, the rhythms of the block, the way favors were exchanged quietly, because pride ran deep on both sides. At one point, a woman at the checkout eyed William and frowned. "You with her?" she asked Grace. "Yes," Grace said simply. The woman shrugged. "Just making sure." Outside, William exhaled slowly. "Does that happen often?" Grace nodded. "More than it should." In the afternoon, William sat on the stoop and watched the street. He saw how easily people were categorized, how quickly sympathy ran dry. He thought about the foundations he had funded, the speeches he had given about opportunity and access. He wondered how many times he had mistaken distance for understanding. A police car rolled by, slowing just enough to notice him. The car moved on. That evening, Annie came home buzzing with energy. She spilled stories about her day, about a classmate who had gotten in trouble for talking back, about a drawing she had made of their apartment, with everybody in it. Everybody? William asked. She nodded. You too. Something tightened in his chest. After dinner, Grace took out a folder from the drawer. I want you to see something, she said. Inside were letters, notices, warnings, rent adjustments, school forms that assumed absence rather than effort. This is what life looks like when you don't have room for mistakes, she said. One slip and everything stacks against you. William read quietly. You shouldn't have to fight this hard. Grace met his eyes. We shouldn't, she said. But we do. That night, after Annie was asleep, William spoke carefully. I have resources, he said. Not money handed out, not charity that humiliates, but tools, knowledge, people who can navigate systems that are designed to confuse. Grace's expression hardened. I don't want handouts. I know, he said. I want to ask permission to help you fight on fair ground. She considered this for a long time. No press, she said. No stories. No. Look what I did. Agreed, he said. And if at any point this stops feeling right, she continued. We stop. Yes, he said. Grace nodded once. Then we'll try. William lay down on the floor again that night, but sleep came easier. Not because things were resolved, far from it, but because the direction was clear. He had started this journey to answer a question about how the world treated a man without money. Now he was asking a harder one. How does a man with power use it without taking something away? Change did not arrive all at once. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine. William learned this within days. He began by doing exactly what Grace had insisted on, nothing that looked like rescue. No sudden solutions. No dramatic gestures. He walked Annie to school when Grace worked early shifts. He picked up groceries when Grace worked late ones. He sat on the stoop with the neighbors and listened more than he spoke. People noticed him anyway. They always did. At first, the reactions were cautious. Curious glances. The unspoken question of who he was and why he was there. A few neighbors nodded. Others watched from behind curtains. One afternoon, a group of men gathered near the corner store. The same ones William had seen pushing others out of their spot on the sidewalk. They looked at him openly now. No effort made to hide their disdain. Too many mouths already, one of them muttered as William passed. William didn't respond. He had learned that dignity, when withheld, often exposed the poverty of the person withholding it. Still, the tension grew. Grace felt it too. She felt it in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, in the way a neighbor who used to borrow sugar suddenly crossed the street, in the way a building manager lingered too long in the hallway when William was home. One evening, Grace set her keys down harder than usual. People are talking, she said. I know, William replied. They think you're trouble. I might be, he said honestly. Grace exhaled sharply. This is exactly what I was worried about. William nodded. That's why I want to do the next part carefully. She folded her arms. What next part? Returning, he said. But not the way they expect. Grace studied his face. Explain. I need to step back into who I was, William said. But not publicly. Not yet. I need access. Quiet access. To what? She asked. To systems, he said. Housing offices. Legal clinics. School boards. The places where decisions are made without the people affected ever being present. Grace's eyes narrowed. And where does that leave us? Right where you are, William said. In control. She didn't answer immediately. That night, Annie overheard part of the conversation. You're leaving again, she said, standing in the doorway in her pajamas. William crouched down to her level. Not leaving, he said. Just doing some work. Eyes. For who? She asked. For you, he said. And your mom. She thought about that. You better not forget us. I won't, he said. And for the first time, he knew it wasn't just reassurance. It was obligation. The next morning, William dressed differently. Nothing dramatic. Just cleaner clothes. A straighter posture. He shaved carefully, watching an older version of himself reemerge in the mirror. Not the billionaire. Not the symbol. Just a man who knew how doors worked. He borrowed Grace's phone and made a call he hadn't planned on making so soon. The voice on the other end went silent when he introduced himself. "William Carter?" the man repeated. "We thought you were unavailable," William said. "Not gone." The meeting took place in a neutral office across town. No signs. No reception desk. Just a man who had once shaken William's hand eagerly and now struggled to reconcile the image in front of him with the one he remembered. "You look different," the man said. "So do you," William replied. They spoke carefully. About zoning laws, about housing vouchers that existed on paper but never reached families who needed them, about how easily records could be flagged, delayed, lost. "And why are you telling me this?" the man asked finally. William leaned forward. "Because I need to know how much of this system is broken by design." The man hesitated, then sighed. "More than anyone admits." When William returned that evening, Annie was doing homework at the table. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "You're back," she said. "Yes," he replied. Grace studied him closely. "Did you get what you needed?" "I got confirmation," William said. "That kindness without structure doesn't last." Grace nodded. "I know." Over the following weeks, small things began to shift. A letter from the school arrived, not a warning this time, but an invitation. Annie was being considered for a program that supported advanced reading skills. The tone was different. Respectful. Grace stared at it in disbelief. "They never noticed before." "They noticed," William said quietly. "They just didn't prioritize." The landlord called, suddenly polite, suddenly flexible about a repair that had gone ignored for months. "Don't like this," Grace said. "Feels like strings." "There are no strings," William said. "Just leverage being redirected." "I know." Grace looked at him sharply. "That sounds like control." "No," he replied. "It sounds like fairness arriving late." Still, the tension inside William grew. Each door that opened reminded him of the doors that had never opened for people like Grace. Each success carried the shadow of his power behind it. One afternoon, Annie asked a question that cut through everything. "Why do people listen to you now?" she asked. William paused. "Because they always did," he said. "I just didn't see it." "That's not nice," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." That night, Grace sat with him at the table long after Annie was asleep. "You're changing things," she said. "But I need to know something." "Ask," he said. "When you're done," she said carefully. "When this experiment, this journey, ends, what happens to us?" William didn't answer right away, because for the first time, the question frightened him. "I don't want to disappear again," he said finally, "and I don't want you to depend on me." Grace nodded. "Those are two very different things." "I know," he said, "and I don't know how to balance them yet." Grace stood and gathered the dishes. "Then you'd better learn," she said, "because Annie doesn't need a hero who leaves. She needs adults who stay accountable." William lay awake again that night, the ceiling familiar now. He understood something new. The danger wasn't that his power would be misused. The danger was that it would be withdrawn once it was no longer convenient. If he was going to do this, truly do it, he would have to confront the final illusion he still carried, that he could ever step away clean. The meeting that forced William's hand came on a gray Thursday afternoon. Grace was at work. Annie was still at school. William sat alone in the apartment, reviewing notes he had written by hand, addresses, agency names, dates. He had learned quickly that writing things down slowed him enough to think, to feel the weight of each detail. The knock at the door came without warning. 2 sharp raps. Professional, unhurried. William didn't move right away. He knew that sound. He had heard it on the other side of doors like this one before, when he had been the man doing the knocking. He stood, straightened his jacket, and opened the door. The woman in the hallway was impeccably dressed, her expression polite in the way that suggested courtesy rather than warmth. A man stood slightly behind her, scanning the apartment without stepping inside. "Mr. Carter," the woman said. It was not a question. William nodded. "That name still works," she smiled faintly. "You've been difficult to locate." "I wasn't hiding," he replied. "I was observing." Her eyes flicked briefly into the apartment. taking in its modest size, the children's drawings taped to the wall, the absence of anything that looked temporary. "So we've gathered," she said. The man behind her cleared his throat. "May we come in?" William hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat at the small table, the chairs too close together. The room suddenly crowded with unspoken power. The woman set a folder down in front of him. "Your board is concerned," she said. "About your absence. About rumors." "Rumors tend to flourish in silence," William said, "which is why we're here." She replied smoothly. "Your philanthropic foundation is stalled. Donors are nervous. And now there are whispers that you've lost perspective." William almost smiled. "I found perspective," he said. "That's what unsettles them." The man leaned forward. "You're living in a neighborhood that doesn't align with your public profile." William met his gaze. "That sentence explains more than you realize." The woman's smile thinned. "We're not here to debate philosophy. We're here to restore order." "Order for whom?" William asked. She ignored the question. "You need to come back," she said. "And what happens to this place?" William asked, gesturing around the apartment. "To the people here?" The man frowned. "That's not our concern." William felt something settle inside him then, a clarity that cut through weeks of tension. "It is mine," he said. The woman closed the folder. "You can't have it both ways." "No," William agreed. "I can't." They stood to leave, the decision unspoken but understood. At the door, the woman paused. "Be careful," she said. "People are more comfortable with your generosity than your discomfort." When the door closed, the apartment felt smaller than it had that morning. Grace came home late that night, exhaustion etched deep into her posture. She took one look at William and knew something had changed. "They found you," she said. "Yes." She set her bag down slowly. "Control," he said. "Visibility. A return to the version of me that makes everyone else comfortable." Grace folded her arms. "And what do you want?" He looked at the wall where Annie's drawing still hung. A stick figure family, 3 people. One labeled Annie, one labeled Mom, one simply labeled him. "I want to finish what I started," William said. "But I won't do it at your expense." Grace sat down heavily. "That sounds like goodbye." "Not exactly," he said. "It sounds like a line being drawn." The next morning, Annie sensed it immediately. "You're thinking again," she said, eyeing him over her cereal. "Yes," he admitted. "Big thinking?" she asked. "The biggest," he said. She nodded solemnly. "Big thinking makes people tired." She wasn't wrong. That afternoon, William walked Annie home from school. Halfway there, they passed the same alley where he had first collapsed days ago. Another man sat there now, hunched over, invisible to the stream of people flowing past. Annie slowed. "We should help him," she said. William stopped with her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the sandwich he had packed earlier. He knelt, spoke softly, handed it over. The man took it without looking up. As they walked on, Annie looked up at him. "You didn't tell him your name." "No," William said. "I didn't need to." That night, William made his decision official. He wrote letters. Not statements. Letters. To board members. To donors. To people who had praised his generosity without ever asking what it was for. He refused interviews. He declined invitations. He resigned from positions that required performance instead of accountability. He kept one thing, the foundation, but he changed its structure. No press releases. No gala dinners. Funding decisions guided by people who lived inside the problems, not above them. Quiet partnerships. Long timelines. Grace read the final draft and looked at him steadily. "This will cost you." "I know," he said. "And if it fails, then it fails honestly." "Oh." Annie climbed onto his lap that evening, something she hadn't done before. She wrapped her arms around his neck and rested her head against his shoulder. "You're not going anywhere, right?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm just standing somewhere different." She accepted that answer easily, the way children do when they trust the adults around them. Later, lying on the floor, William stared at the ceiling one last time. He realized he no longer felt like a guest in this space, nor like a man pretending to be poor. He felt like someone accountable. The world he had come from would not welcome this version of him. That was all right, because the world he had stepped into had already taught him the cost of being unseen. The first consequence arrived quietly, the way most real consequences do. Grace noticed it when the diner's manager called her into the office near the end of her shift. He didn't sit behind the desk the way he usually did. He stood by the window instead, arms crossed, staring out at the street as if rehearsing his words against the glass. "Someone asked about you," he said without turning around. Grace's stomach tightened. "Who?" "Didn't say," he replied. "Just wanted to know if you'd had any changes in your household." Grace kept her face neutral. "People come and go." The manager nodded slowly. "That's what I told them." He turned then, meeting her eyes. "You're a good worker, Grace. Always have been. I don't want trouble here." "I don't bring trouble," she said evenly. He sighed. Sometimes trouble follows people whether they invite it or not. When she got home that evening, she didn't take off her coat right away. William noticed immediately. "Something happened," he said. She nodded. "They're asking questions." "About me?" "About us," she corrected. William felt the familiar knot tighten in his chest. "I said I wouldn't let this touch you." Grace set her bag down. "You don't get to decide where the ripples go," she said. "Only how you respond when they reach shore." Annie sat at the table, coloring. She looked up. "What ripples?" Grace forced a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about." Annie narrowed her eyes. "You say that when you're worried." William crouched beside her. "Grown-up problems," he said gently. "We're handling them." She studied his face, then nodded, returning to her drawing, but she colored harder than before. Over the next few days, the pressure increased in subtle ways. A neighbor complained about noise that didn't exist. The landlord posted a notice about unauthorized occupants. Though no names were listed, a woman Grace barely knew asked, too casually, whether she felt safe having strange men around her child. Grace absorbed it all in silence. William did not. He made calls. Quiet ones. Not to intimidate, not to threaten, but to document, to create records, to ensure that every question asked about Grace had an answer attached to it, lawful, boring, undeniable. "This is the part people never see," he told Grace one night. "Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just files paperwork." And she didn't smile. "I shouldn't need you to do that." "You shouldn't," he agreed. "But the system isn't interested in should." That weekend, Annie had a school event. A reading circle for parents and caregivers. Grace hesitated before agreeing to go. "They'll look," she said. "They always do," William replied. "Let them," Grace sighed. "You're not coming." William nodded. "I know." He waited outside, sitting on a bench across the street, watching families filter in and out. He saw Grace inside, seated near the back. Annie stood at the front, book clutched in her hands, reading carefully, proudly. When she finished, she scanned the room instinctively, then glanced toward the window. William raised a hand in a small wave. She smiled. That night, Annie asked a question she'd been holding on to. "Why do some people want you to go away?" she asked. William considered the answer carefully. "Because when people are comfortable, they don't like reminders that the world isn't fair." "That's silly," she said. "Yes," he replied. "It is." She thought about that. "Are you going to leave?" "No," he said. "But I might have to change how I stand." She accepted that answer, but her eyes stayed on him longer than usual. A week later, the confrontation came in daylight. William was walking back from the corner store when he saw two men waiting on the stoop. One wore a city badge clipped to his jacket. The other didn't bother pretending. "Mr. Carter," the badge holder said. "We need a word." William stopped a few feet away. "You're blocking a residential entrance." The man smirked. "Temporary inconvenience." "What do you want?" William asked. The second man stepped forward. "You're drawing attention. That's not good for anyone." William met his gaze. "Attention to what?" "To inequity," the man replied flatly. "To things people prefer remain theoretical." William felt no fear, only a cold steadiness. "You don't get to decide where I live." "No," the man said. "But we get to make it uncomfortable." Grace opened the door then, having seen them through the peephole. Annie stood behind her. William's voice sharpened. "Step away from them." The badge holder raised his hands. "No one's threatening anyone." "Leave," Grace said, her voice low and unyielding. The men exchanged a look, then backed off slowly. "This doesn't end here," one said. William watched them go. Inside, Grace locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Annie wrapped her arms around her waist. "I don't like them," Annie said. "Neither do I," Grace replied. That night, Grace finally let the anger surface. "You said quiet," she said to William. "This isn't quiet anymore." "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry." She stared at him. "If this gets worse, if Annie's safety is even hinted at, I won't hesitate." "You shouldn't," William said. "And I won't fight you." Silence fell between them. "I'm not here to be brave," Grace said finally. "I'm here to protect my child." William nodded. "So am I." The next morning, William made another decision. He went public, not with a spectacle, but with clarity. A single statement. No photos, no interviews. A simple declaration of where he lived, why he lived there, and what he was building. He named no one. Accused no one. He simply made himself visible in a way that could not be quietly erased. The response was immediate. Some praised him. Some mocked him. Some grew nervous. But the questions stopped being whispered. That evening, Grace watched the news in silence as Annie brushed her teeth. "You didn't ask me first," Grace said. "No," William admitted. "I decided this part had to be mine." She considered that. "And if this brings more heat, then the heat comes to me," he said. "Not you." Grace studied him for a long moment. "You're changing the rules," she said. "Yes," he replied, "because the old ones were killing people quietly." Later, Annie climbed into bed and looked at him seriously. "You're still here," she said. "Yes." "Then I'm not scared," she said, and rolled over. William sat in the dim light of the living room long after everyone slept. He understood now that kindness had a cost once it stepped into daylight, and he was willing to pay it. The city reacted the way it always did when someone disrupted its preferred silence, slowly at first. Then all at once, William's statement circulated without fanfare, passed from screen to screen, discussed in tones that shifted depending on who was speaking. Some called it brave, others called it reckless. A few dismissed it as performance, but what none of them could do was ignore it. Grace felt the change within days. The landlord stopped lingering in the hallway. The notices disappeared. The diner manager no longer asked questions, only nodded when she came in, his eyes avoiding hers in a way that suggested relief, more than suspicion. "You did something," Grace said one evening as she set groceries on the counter. William nodded. "I made it inconvenient for them to pretend you were the problem." She studied him. "I don't like being a symbol." "I know," he said. "Neither do I." Annie experienced the shift differently. Children are quick to sense when adults are tense, but even quicker to notice when that tension eases. Her shoulders relaxed. She laughed louder. She slept through the night without waking to check whether the door was locked. At school, her teacher pulled Grace aside one afternoon. "Annie's been more confident," she said. "She reads like someone who knows she belongs here." Grace swallowed. "She does belong." "Yes," the teacher agreed. "She does." William began to receive messages, not from the powerful, but from the overlooked. A former factory worker whose disability claim had stalled for years. A single father navigating a housing appeal. A retired woman facing eviction after a clerical error erased her pension record. He read every one. He answered only a few. "I can't fix everything," he told Grace, "but I can make sure the process stops pretending to be neutral." Grace leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "And what happens when people start expecting miracles?" "Then I disappoint them honestly," he said. "That's better than lying." One evening, a black sedan idled across the street longer than necessary. William noticed it immediately. So did Grace. "That car's been there before," she said quietly. "I know." Annie pressed her face to the window. "They're watching again," she said, not afraid, just observant. "Yes," William replied. "They are." He stepped outside alone. The air was cool, carrying the familiar mix of exhaust and distant sirens. He walked toward the sedan until the driver rolled down the window. "You're being dramatic," the man said. This didn't need to be public. It needed to be clear, William replied. The man sighed. You're making powerful people uncomfortable. Good, William said. Discomfort is how growth starts. The sedan pulled away. When William returned upstairs, Grace was waiting. You don't have to keep doing this alone, she said. I know, he replied. But I won't ask you to stand where I stand. She nodded. Then, I'll stand where I choose. The weeks that followed brought a strange equilibrium. Attention remained, but it changed tone. It was no longer probing, no longer predatory. It became cautious, respectful, in its way. The kind of attention that recognizes limits. William worked quietly. He funded legal clinics without naming them. He backed policy reviews without attaching his name. He insisted on listening sessions where he did not speak at all. Power hates being quiet, he told Grace one night. It mistakes silence for weakness. Grace smiled faintly. You're learning. Annie learned too, in her own way. She began sharing her lunch more often at school, but not recklessly. She chose carefully. She noticed who never had enough. She noticed who pretended not to care. Kindness isn't about giving everything away, William told her gently one afternoon. It's about seeing clearly. She considered that. I see you, she said. He felt the weight of it more than any headline. One Saturday morning, they returned to the alley. Not for spectacle, not for memory, just because Annie asked. The same men were there. Some familiar faces, some new. A few looked at William with recognition, others with suspicion. Annie approached a woman sitting against the wall, her hands wrapped around a paper cup. Annie offered a sandwich. The woman took it without surprise. Thank you, she said. William watched from a distance, his chest tight. Grace stood beside him. You changed her world, she said quietly. No, William replied. She changed mine. That night, as Annie slept, Grace sat across from him at the table. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. Is time. When this grows, she said carefully, when it demands more than you can give quietly, what then? William thought about the boardrooms he had left behind, the friends who had vanished, the systems that now watched him warily. Then I'll have to choose again, he said. And again after that. Grace nodded. Just don't forget who taught you how to see. I won't, he said. I can't. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and relentless as ever. But inside that small apartment, something held. Not safety, not certainty, but truth. And William understood now that truth, once lived, could not be unlearned. The letter arrived on a Monday morning. Folded once, slid beneath the apartment door without ceremony. Grace saw it first when she stepped over it on her way out. She stopped, bent down, and stared at the envelope longer than necessary. No return address. Her name typed, not handwritten. She didn't open it until she got home. William was at the table with Annie, helping her sound out words from a library book. Annie was patient with him in the way children are patient with adults who are trying their best. Stop guessing, she said, tapping the page. Look at the letters. William smiled. I am looking. Grace set her bag down and placed the envelope on the table between them. What's that? Annie asked. A letter, Grace said. From who? Grace didn't answer. She sat, opened it carefully, and read. Her face didn't change much at first. That was what frightened William. He had learned to read boardrooms, negotiations, threat assessments. He had learned to read Grace, too. When her face went still, it meant she was measuring danger. What is it? William asked quietly. Grace folded the letter. It's from the school district. Annie stiffened. Did I do something wrong? No, Grace said immediately. This isn't about trouble. William leaned forward. Then what? They're offering Annie a transfer, Grace said. A private scholarship placement. Full ride. 17 free. Annie's eyes widened. Like a new school? Yes, Grace said. Across town, William felt the room tilt slightly. Because of your reading scores? That's what the letter says, Grace replied. And because they think she'd benefit from an enriched environment. Annie looked between them. Is that good? Grace didn't answer right away. William did. It can be, he said. But it's also complicated. Grace nodded. Very complicated. They put the letter aside for the night. Annie went to bed restless, full of questions that had no simple answers. When the apartment grew quiet, Grace sat across from William at the table. "This is what I was afraid of," she said. William didn't pretend not to understand. "They want to separate her," he said. "Move her into a system where she's an exception instead of a member. They want to showcase her," Grace said. Quietly. Safely. Without fixing what's broken where she is. Redded. William felt a familiar anger rise, sharp and precise. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," Grace replied. "But your presence made her visible. Visibility has a price." He rubbed his hands together, thinking. If she goes, she gets resources. Smaller classes. Opportunities she shouldn't have to fight for. And she loses her community, Grace said. Her friends, her sense of belonging, silence stretched between them. "I won't decide this for you," William said. "Or for her." "Says." Grace nodded. "Good." The next day, Annie came home quieter than usual. She set her backpack down and sat at the table without being asked. "Kids at school were talking," she said. Grace's chest tightened. "About what?" "About me," Annie replied. "They said I might be leaving. They said I was lucky." William watched her carefully. "Do you feel lucky?" Annie thought about it. "I feel weird." Grace reached for her hand. "Do you want to go?" Annie shrugged. "I don't want to leave you," she said. Then, after a pause, "I don't want to leave him either." William swallowed. "But I like learning," Annie added. "I like when books are hard." Grace smiled faintly. "You can like learning anywhere." That night, William walked alone. He took the long route, past the alley, past the diner, past the places where his presence had first unsettled the balance. He thought about opportunity as it was usually framed singular, selective, conditional. He thought about how systems preferred to extract talent rather than cultivate communities. By morning, he had his answer. He asked Grace to meet him at the table after Annie left for school. "I can't fix this by choosing for her," he said. "But I can change the choice." Grace waited. "I can fund a program here," William continued. "Not a transfer, not a showcase. A library. Reading specialists. After-school support. For everyone." Grace's eyes narrowed. "And the district? I'll make it easier for them to say yes than to say no," William said. Quietly, Grace leaned back. "And if they refuse? Then I make their refusal visible," he said. "Not with Annie's name. With data." Grace considered him for a long moment. "This keeps her here." "Yes, and gives her what she needs." "And gives it to others," William said. "So she isn't the exception." Grace exhaled slowly. "That's the right answer." The district meeting was tense, but brief. William didn't attend in person. He didn't need to. The proposal spoke for itself. Sustainable funding, local hiring, oversight by parents and teachers, not donors. The scholarship letter was withdrawn quietly. A new letter arrived 2 weeks later, addressed to the school, not the apartment. Annie never knew how close she'd come to being moved like a piece on someone else's board. What she did know was that the library got new books, that a woman named Miss Alvarez came twice a week to help with reading, that her friend Marcus stopped pretending he hated school. One afternoon, Annie looked up from a book and said, "I think the world got bigger." William smiled. It did. Grace watched them from the doorway, a mix of pride and caution in her eyes. "This doesn't end," she said to William later. "They'll keep testing." "I know," he said. "So will we." That night, William lay awake again, but the ceiling no longer felt like a witness. It felt like a promise, not of safety, not of permanence, but of responsibility that had found its direction. The first real backlash did not come from the district or the donors. It came from the street. It was subtle at first. A comment muttered too loudly outside the bodega. A flyer taped crookedly to a lamppost complaining about outside money changing the neighborhood. A look held a second too long by someone who had once nodded politely. Grace noticed before William did. "They're uneasy," she said one evening, standing by the window. People don't trust change when it doesn't ask permission. Because William joined her. They're right not to, he said. Trust has been abused too often. That didn't stop the unease from growing. The after-school reading program brought parents into the building who hadn't been there before. Conversations spilled onto the sidewalk. Children lingered longer. It was good, but it was visible. And visibility, William had learned, was never neutral. One afternoon, as Annie packed up her books, a boy's mother pulled Grace aside. "People are saying this won't last," she said quietly. "That once the money dries up, we'll be worse off than before." Grace nodded. "People say that every time someone tries." "And what do you think?" the woman asked. Grace looked at Annie, laughing with her friends. "I think we teach our kids to read," she said. "Whatever happens after, they keep that." The woman smiled faintly. Fair enough. William spent more time listening than speaking. He sat in on meetings without introducing himself beyond his first name. He watched how quickly suspicion softened when people realized he wasn't there to lead, only to support. Not everyone softened. One night, a brick shattered against the building's side, the sound sharp and violent in the quiet street. Annie woke screaming. Grace was at her side instantly. William stood frozen in the living room, heart pounding, the echo of impact still ringing in his ears. "It's okay," Grace whispered to Annie, holding her close. "You're safe." William didn't feel safe. He felt furious. The police arrived late and left early, taking notes without promise. "Probably kids," one officer said. "Vandalism happens." Grace said nothing. After Annie fell back asleep, Grace turned to William, her face pale but steady. "This is what I meant," she said. "This is the line." William nodded. "I know. What are you going to do?" she asked. He answered without hesitation. "I'm going to make it stop." Grace's voice sharpened. "How?" "By removing the ambiguity," he said. "People are afraid because they don't know who I am or what I want. Rumors fill the gaps." Grace crossed her arms. "And you think clarity will fix fear?" "No," William said, "but it will shift it." The meeting was held in the community center 2 days later. No press, no cameras, just folding chairs, tired faces, crossed arms, and a room full of people who had learned the hard way not to trust strangers with good intentions. William stood at the front, hands visible, posture relaxed but grounded. "My name is William Carter," he said. A ripple moved through the room. Recognition, disbelief, irritation. "I'm not here to explain myself," he continued. "I'm here to answer questions." A man near the back stood up immediately. "You think you can buy respect?" William shook his head. "No, I think respect can't be bought. That's why I'm not trying." Another voice followed. "How long before you leave?" "I don't know," William said. "Honestly, longer than this program. Shorter than the problems." Murmurs spread. A woman stood next. "My kid got help because of this. I don't care who pays." Others nodded. Then someone asked the question William had been waiting for. "What do you get out of this?" Silence fell. William took a breath. "I get accountability," he said. "I get reminded every day that kindness without humility becomes control. And I don't want to be that man anymore." Grace watched from the side, Annie tucked against her hip, half asleep but listening. "I'm not asking you to like me," William finished. "I'm asking you to judge me by what stays after I'm gone." The room didn't erupt into applause. It didn't need to. People lingered afterward. Conversations started that hadn't before. A few still glared. A few thanked him. Most simply watched. That night, Annie asked, "Why were people mad at you?" William thought about it. "Because they were scared," he said. "And because sometimes anger feels safer than hope." She considered that. "Hope is hard." "Yes," he agreed. "It asks more of us." Weeks passed without another incident. The brick was repaired. The lamppost flyer disappeared. The program continued. Quieter now. More rooted. Grace noticed something else too. William was changing again, not into the man he had been before. Into someone steadier. Less driven by guilt. More guided by patience. "You're not trying to fix everything anymore," she observed one night. "No," he said. "I'm trying to be consistent." Grace smiled. "That's rarer." One evening, Annie brought home a drawing. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a building filled with books. Above them, she had written carefully, unevenly, "People help people." William stared at it for a long time. Later, alone, he allowed himself one private truth. This had never really been about poverty or wealth, or even kindness. It had been about dignity, and dignity, once recognized, demanded protection, not spectacle. As he lay down to sleep, the city's noise drifting through the window, William understood something with a calm that surprised him. The hardest part wasn't giving up power. It was learning how to share it without taking space away from those who had earned it by surviving. The call came just after midnight. William was awake, as he often was now, sitting at the small table with a notebook open in front of him. He had learned to write when his thoughts refused to settle. Words slowed the noise, gave shape to responsibility. His phone vibrated once. Unknown number. He answered without hesitation. "Yes." There was a pause on the other end. Then a familiar voice, older now, edged with irritation and something like disbelief. "You really did it," the man said. "You burned every bridge." William recognized him instantly. A former partner. One of the last men who had laughed with him when power still felt effortless. "I didn't burn them," William replied calmly. "I walked away." "That's not how the rest of us see it," the man said. "You embarrassed people. You made them look cruel." William closed his eyes briefly. "They didn't need my help to do that." The man exhaled sharply. "You've become a liability. We duddens." "That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years," William replied. Silence stretched. "Come back," the man said finally. "We can fix this. Reframe it. You make a statement. Step away from whatever this is. People will forget." William glanced toward the couch, where Annie slept curled beneath her blanket, one arm flung protectively over a stack of library books. "No," he said. The man scoffed. "You're choosing a fantasy over reality." "No," William said again, firmer now. "I'm choosing accountability over comfort." The line went dead. William set the phone down and sat very still. For the first time since this journey had begun, he felt no fear of consequence, only clarity. The consequences were already here. The next morning, Grace noticed the change before he spoke. "You heard from them," she said, pouring coffee. "Yes." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. "They won't stop," she said. "I know," William replied. "This is the part where they test endurance." Grace leaned against the counter. "And if they try to go around you?" "They already have," he said. "That's why the pressure's shifting." That afternoon, the pressure arrived in person. 2 women from a nonprofit Grace had never heard of showed up unannounced at the community center during the reading program. They smiled too brightly, spoke too smoothly, asked too many questions about funding and leadership. William watched from the back of the room. They didn't ask the parents what they needed. They told them what they could offer. Expansion, visibility, sponsorships. Their words were wrapped in opportunity, but underneath was something familiar. Extraction. Afterward, Grace cornered William outside. "They're trying to take this," she said quietly. "Turn it into a brand." "Yes," William said. "They think because it's working, it must belong to someone." Grace's jaw tightened. "Not happening." "No," William agreed. "It isn't." That evening, William called a meeting not with donors, not with institutions, but with parents. He stood in the same community room. The folding chairs filled again. The atmosphere heavier this time. The stakes were no longer theoretical. "I want to be clear," he said. "This program doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to any organization. It belongs to this community." A man raised his hand. "Then why are outsiders sniffing around?" William nodded. "Because success attracts attention, and attention attracts people who believe control should follow." A murmur rippled through the room. "If you want to shut that down," William continued, "you need governance. Local governance. Parents. Teachers. Neighbors. Written rules that don't change when money shows up." Grace spoke then. "We don't need saviors," she said. We need structure that protects what we've built. Heads nodded. By the end of the meeting, a council was formed. Small, unpaid, accountable. William insisted on one rule above all others. He would not sit on it. Annie listened to him explain later that night, her chin resting on her hands. "So you're giving it away?" she asked. "No," William said. "I'm giving it back." She smiled. "That's better." A week later, the nonprofit withdrew its interest. Too complicated. Too many voices. Not enough control. Grace read the email and laughed for the first time in days. "You made it boring," she said. "Boring is underrated," William replied. The city moved on. Restless as ever. New headlines replaced old ones. William's name appeared less frequently now, which suited him fine. But one thing did not move on: the quiet loyalty. People remembered who had stayed when it became inconvenient, who had listened instead of directing, who had stepped back instead of claiming credit. One evening, as William walked home alone, a man he recognized from the alley nodded at him. "Didn't think you'd last," the man said. William nodded back. "Neither did I." That night, Grace sat across from him at the table. The room lit softly, the hum of the refrigerator steady. "You know," she said, "at some point, you're going to have to decide what this makes you." William considered that. "It makes me responsible," he said. Grace smiled faintly. "That's not a title people usually want." "I know," he replied. "That's why it matters." Later, as Annie slept, William stood by the window and looked out at the street. He thought about the man he had been, the one who believed generosity could be measured, that justice could be outsourced, that money could absolve distance. He thought about the man he was becoming. Not redeemed, not heroic, accountable, and for the first time, he understood that this was not a phase of his life. It was the shape of it. The calm did not last. It never did. William sensed the shift before anyone named it. The rhythm of the block changed subtly, the way conversations cut off when he approached, the way people checked their phones more often, the way a quiet vigilance crept back into Grace's posture when she locked the door at night. The program was stable. The council met regularly. Annie was thriving. On paper, everything was working, which meant something else was coming. It arrived in the form of a lawsuit. The envelope was thick, official, delivered in the middle of the afternoon. Grace found it when she came home from work, her name printed clearly beneath a line of legal language that made her stomach drop. She didn't open it right away. William watched her sit at the table, stare at it, then finally tear it open with steady hands. "What is it?" he asked. Grace read in silence. Her jaw tightened. When she finished, she slid the papers across the table. "Landlord," she said, "claiming lease violations, unauthorized activities, safety concerns." William skimmed the pages once. Then again, he felt a familiar cold settle in his chest, not panic, but calculation. "They're trying to force you out," he said. "Yes," Grace replied, and not quietly. Annie stood in the doorway, listening. "Are we moving?" she asked. Grace closed her eyes briefly. Then she looked at her daughter. "Not yet," she said, "and not without a fight." William leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "This isn't about rent," he said. "It's about control." Grace laughed bitterly. "It always is." That night, William made calls he had hoped not to make, not to intimidate, not to silence, to prepare. He contacted attorneys who understood housing law as lived experience, not abstraction. He pulled records, patterns, previous complaints against the landlord, quiet settlements, sudden evictions after tenants organized. By morning, the shape of it was clear. "They've done this before," William said. "They push until people fold." Grace nodded. "Most people don't have the time or energy to fight." Annie sat at the table, drawing. "I don't want to leave my room," she said quietly. Grace's chest tightened. "You won't," she said. But the words felt fragile. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Too quickly. Grace took the day off work. William walked with her to the courthouse, Annie's hand clasped tightly in Grace's other one. The building was cold, impersonal, its hallways echoing with footsteps and low voices. William didn't speak much. He let the attorney talk. Let the documents speak. When the landlord's representative suggested that outside influence had disrupted the building's balance, William felt Grace stiffen beside him. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Be specific," she said. The man hesitated. William didn't intervene. He didn't need to. Facts did what rhetoric could not. The hearing ended without resolution. A stay was granted. A review ordered. Temporary relief. Outside, Grace exhaled shakily. "They're not done." "No," William agreed, "but neither are we." On the walk home, Annie asked, "Why do they want us gone?" Grace struggled for words. William answered instead. "Because when people stand up together, it scares those who benefit from them staying quiet." "Oh, Annie frowned. "That's not fair." "No," he said. "It isn't." The following weeks were heavy. Grace went to work exhausted, carrying stress she tried not to show. William took on more of the day-to-day, walking Annie to school, cooking, listening. One night, Grace finally snapped. "I didn't ask for this," she said, voice shaking. "I didn't ask to be an example or a battleground." William didn't interrupt. "I just wanted my kids safe," she continued. "I just wanted a life that didn't feel like it could collapse any minute." William nodded slowly. "And I brought attention that made things harder." "Yes," Grace said. Then, after a pause, "But I don't regret it." That surprised them both. "I don't regret standing up," she said. "I regret how expensive it is." William felt the weight of that truth settle deep. "I can end this," he said quietly. Grace looked at him sharply. "How?" "I can buy the building," he said, quietly. "Transfer ownership to a tenant trust. No landlord to threaten you again." Grace stared at him. "That's not quiet." "It can be," William said. "No press, no announcement, just paperwork." Grace stood and walked to the window. She stared out at the street for a long time. "And what happens to the neighbors?" she asked. "The ones who didn't ask for your help? The ones who don't trust you? They get stability," William said. "Or they don't take it. The choice stays theirs." "Oh," Grace turned back to him. "This is crossing a line." "Yes," William said. "But so is using eviction as punishment." Silence stretched. Annie looked up from her drawing. "I don't want bad people deciding where we live," she said simply. Grace's shoulders sagged. She sank into a chair. "I hate that this makes sense," she said. William's voice was steady. "I won't do it unless you say yes." Grace closed her eyes. When she opened them, there were tears there but also resolve. "Do it," she said. "But we do it right." They did. The purchase was completed through layers of anonymity. The building transferred into a cooperative trust. Tenants were notified not with celebration, but with clarity. No rent hikes, no sudden changes, no speeches, just stability. The lawsuit was withdrawn without comment. Life didn't become easy overnight, but it stopped feeling like it was constantly under threat. One evening, as Annie brushed her teeth, she said, "It's quiet again." "I was." Grace smiled faintly. "Quiet doesn't mean finished." William stood in the doorway, listening, understanding. Quiet meant space to breathe, and for now, that was enough. Stability changed the air in the building. It wasn't dramatic. No banners, no sudden celebrations. Just the quiet absence of fear that had once crept through the hallways at night. Doors stayed open longer. Conversations lingered on the stairs. Someone fixed the flickering light on the third floor without waiting for permission. Grace noticed it in small ways. The way Mrs. Delaney no longer rushed past with her keys clenched between her fingers. The way the man downstairs started playing old soul records again on Sunday afternoons. The sound drifting gently through open windows. The way Annie stopped asking, every few days, if they were going to have to leave. William noticed it too, but he kept his distance. He attended no meetings. He made no appearances. The tenant trust existed without his face attached to it, exactly as promised. His name lived only in legal documents few people would ever read, and that was how it needed to be. One evening, Grace found him sitting alone on the stoop, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. "You're quieter lately," she said, sitting beside him. "So are you," he replied. She smiled faintly. "Quiet feels different now." "Yes," he said. "It feels earned." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. You know this won't be the last test, Grace said finally. William nodded. It never is. Grace turned to him. Then what happens when the next one comes? He thought about that carefully. Then we respond the same way, he said. Slowly. Together. Without pretending there's a perfect answer. Grace exhaled. I used to think strength meant certainty. So did I, William said. Turns out it means endurance. Annie burst out of the building moments later, a library book clutched under her arm. Guess what? She announced. Grace smiled. What? I got picked to read at the assembly, Annie said, practically bouncing. In front of everyone. William raised an eyebrow. Are you nervous? She shook her head. A little, but mostly excited. Grace watched her daughter with a mix of pride and something like awe. You didn't used to like speaking in front of people, Annie shrugged. I know how to read now, she said, as if that explained everything. Later that night, after Annie fell asleep, Grace sat at the table with paperwork spread out in front of her. What are you doing? William asked. Looking at night classes, she replied. Community college. Social work. William studied her. That's a big step. She nodded. I keep seeing how systems fail people. I don't want to just survive them anymore. William felt something shift inside him. What made you decide this now? Grace didn't hesitate. Because I finally believe staying is an option. The words landed heavier than she intended. William understood the weight of them. For people like Grace, staying had never been guaranteed. It had always been provisional, conditional, subject to forces beyond her control. Until now. You don't owe this place anything, William said carefully. Grace met his eyes. I know. That's why it's a choice. The next week brought the kind of attention William had hoped to avoid. A journalist called. Then another. Questions about housing, philanthropy, quiet purchases, unnamed donors. William declined every request. When one reporter showed up anyway, lingering across the street with a camera, Grace felt the old tension coil in her chest. They'll make this a story, she said. They always do, William replied. But stories don't have to belong to the loudest voice. That night, William made one last public move. He published a short op-ed in a local paper. No photos, no biography, just words. He wrote about how charity often mistakes control for care, about how communities don't need saviors, only consistency, about how justice fails when it requires gratitude from those it claims to serve. He did not mention Grace, or Annie, or the building. The piece ran once. It was shared quietly. Then the cycle moved on. The reporters stopped coming. At the school assembly, Annie stood on stage, gripping the microphone with both hands. The auditorium was filled with parents, teachers, children shifting in their seats. Grace sat near the back, heart pounding. William stood against the wall, unobtrusive. Annie took a breath and began to read. Her voice was steady, clear, confident. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She finished to applause that felt honest, not polite. Grace wiped her eyes. William felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was still tight. Afterward, Annie ran to them. Did you hear me? She asked. Yes, Grace said, pulling her into a hug. Everyone heard you. William knelt. How did it feel? Annie grinned. Like I mattered. That night, William sat alone again, notebook open. He wrote about power, not the kind that accumulates, but the kind that redistributes, the kind that makes itself smaller so others can stand taller. He wrote about a 6-year-old girl who gave away her last meal without knowing she was rewriting a life. And he wrote one line that he underlined twice. Justice is not loud. It is persistent. When he closed the notebook, he felt something close to peace, not because the world was fixed, but because he finally understood his place in it. The warning signs returned disguised as opportunity. William recognized them immediately, not because they were loud, but because they were polished. An invitation arrived addressed to him by name, delivered through an assistant who smiled too carefully. A closed-door forum. Civic leaders. Philanthropic partners. A conversation about scalable impact. Grace read it over his shoulder. They want you back in the room. Yes, William said. On their terms. Annie, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up. Is that bad? It can be, Grace replied gently. Depending on why, William didn't respond right away. He folded the invitation and set it aside. He had learned that urgency was often a trick, one designed to rush consent past judgment. That evening, he walked the neighborhood alone. He passed the library windows glowing warm against the dusk. He passed the alley where this story had begun, now quieter, still scarred, still human. He watched a father lift his child onto his shoulders, heard laughter ripple across a stoop. This was the scale that mattered. When he returned, Grace was waiting. "You're thinking about it," she said. "Yes." She crossed her arms. "Say it out loud." "They want a symbol," William said. "Proof that the system works when the right people step in." Grace's jaw tightened. "And you know what happens next?" "Yes," he replied. "They'll ask me to speak for people who didn't choose me, to smooth over harm with language." Grace nodded. "So what are you going to do?" William looked toward Annie's room, where a soft nightlight glowed beneath the door. "I'm going to attend," he said, "and I'm going to disappoint them." The forum was held in a glass-walled building downtown. Clean lines, neutral colors, smiles that arrived before eyes. William took a seat near the edge of the table. He wore no suit, no insignia of power beyond what people already projected onto him. The moderator opened with praise, vision, courage, innovative restraint. William listened. When it was his turn, he spoke plainly. "I won't endorse a model that requires gratitude from the people it claims to help," he said. "And I won't participate in anything that extracts stories to justify comfort." The room shifted. A woman across the table smiled tightly. "We're just looking for best practices." William met her gaze. "Then practice listening." A man cleared his throat. "With respect, change requires leadership." "Yes," William agreed. "But leadership isn't ownership." Silence followed, not stunned, calculating. William stood. "If you want scalable impact, fund unglamorous consistency. Support local governance. Step back when asked. Step away when necessary." He paused. "And stop confusing access with entitlement." He left before questions could soften the message. By the time he returned home, the city had already begun its quiet response. Messages waited. Some supportive, some sharp, a few disappointed. Grace poured tea and handed him a mug. "You didn't stay," she said. "I said what I needed to say," William replied. "Staying would have diluted it." Grace studied him. "That costs you." "Yes," he said, "but not what matters." The cost arrived anyway. 2 days later, a funding stream for an unrelated project dried up. A partner withdrew without explanation. A door closed that would not reopen. William absorbed it without comment. Grace noticed. "You okay?" "Yes," he said. And he was not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer surprised him. Annie noticed too, in her way. "You look tired," she said that night. William smiled, thinking tired. She nodded sagely. "Thinking makes people tired." "Yes," he said. "It does." She climbed into his lap with a book. "Read to me?" He did, slowly, carefully, each word placed with intention. Later, Grace joined him at the table. "You're choosing a smaller life," she said quietly. William considered that. "No," he said. "I'm choosing a narrower one. Deeper." Grace smiled. "That sounds like you." The next morning, the community council met without him. Decisions were made. Disagreements handled. Progress continued. That was the measure. Weeks passed. The city shifted its attention elsewhere. William's name faded from the edges of conversation, but the work held. One evening, Grace came home with a letter of her own acceptance into the program she'd applied for. She stood in the kitchen staring at it. Stunned. "I got in," she said. William looked up. "You earned it." She laughed, a little breathless. "I know, I just didn't think." "Don't diminish it," he said gently. She met his eyes. "I won't." That night, as rain tapped against the windows, William sat once more with his notebook. He wrote about temptation, the kind that comes disguised as influence, about how systems try to reclaim those who escape their gravity. He wrote about restraint as an active choice. And he wrote this, last, "If justice needs a spokesperson, it has already failed." He closed the notebook and listened to the rain. The world would keep testing him, Of that, he was certain. But he was no longer negotiating his values. He was living them. The morning felt ordinary. That was how William knew it mattered. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, catching dust in the air, warming the worn kitchen table where Annie ate her cereal with deliberate care. Grace moved quietly between stove and sink, humming a tune she hadn't realized she remembered from childhood. No headlines, no phone calls, no urgency. Just life. Annie looked up suddenly. "Are you coming with me today?" William smiled. "Where?" "To walk to school," she said, as if the answer were obvious. "You used to." Grace met his eyes over Annie's head. "If you want, I do," William said. They walked together beneath trees just beginning to show green again, the city stretching awake around them. Parents nodded. A crossing guard waved. Annie skipped ahead, then stopped, waiting for them to catch up. "You're slow," she announced. Grace laughed. "We're older," William corrected gently. "We're careful, too. I have to do that." At the school gate, Annie turned serious. She hugged Grace first, then William. "You'll be here later?" she asked. "Yes," William said. "Always." She nodded, satisfied, and ran inside without looking back. Grace exhaled. "She's growing fast." "Yes," William replied. So quietly, they stood for a moment longer, then turned back toward home. Grace broke the silence. "I start classes next week." William smiled. "You're ready." She nodded. "I'm terrified." "Einzest, that's usually how you know," he said. That afternoon, William packed a small box, not to leave but to let go. Old documents, old devices, things that had once defined him. He sealed the box and carried it down the stairs to the basement storage unit the building used collectively. Mrs. Delaney was there, sorting cans. "You moving?" she asked, half joking. "No," William said, "just making space." She nodded knowingly. "That's harder." He left the box behind. In the evening, the three of them ate dinner together, simple food, shared easily. Annie talked about a story she was writing. Grace listened with the intensity she once reserved only for survival. After dishes were done, Annie climbed onto the couch with a book. "Read to us," she said. William hesitated. "I read to you." "Read to us," she insisted. Grace raised an eyebrow. "I don't mind." So he did. His voice was steady, unhurried. He read about journeys and choices, about characters who discovered that the world changed only when they did. When he finished, Annie yawned dramatically. That was a good ending. Grace smiled. The best ones feel like beginnings. Later, after Annie slept, Grace and William sat together in the quiet. "You know," Grace said, "people still ask about you." William nodded. "They always will." "They ask why you stayed," she continued. "And what do you tell them?" Grace considered. "That you were tired of being important and decided to be useful." William laughed softly. "That's not wrong." Grace's expression grew serious. "You could still leave. Start over somewhere easier." "I know," he said. "And you're not going to." "No." She studied him. "Why?" "Why?" William didn't answer immediately. He thought about the alley, the meal, the child who hadn't known the weight of what she gave away and had changed everything by doing so. "Because I was seen," he said finally, "when I didn't deserve it. And once you're seen like that, you can't unsee the world." Grace nodded, understanding more than he had said. Outside, the city moved on, restless, imperfect, alive. William knew challenges would return. Systems would push back. Comfort would tempt. Fear would resurface in quieter forms. But he also knew this. Justice did not arrive as a moment. It arrived as a practice. It lived in choices repeated daily, in restraint, in listening, in staying. Later that night, William stepped onto the stoop one last time before bed. The streetlight flickered, then steadied. He thought of the man he had been, the one who measured worth in numbers, who mistook distance for safety. That man felt far away now, like someone he once knew but no longer needed to be. Above him, a window glowed softly. Inside, a child slept peacefully. A mother planned a future she had chosen. A life, ordinary, resilient, real, waited for him. William turned back toward the door. The story that began with a single act of kindness did not end with gratitude or reward. It ended with responsibility, and with a quiet truth that needed no audience. When power learns to kneel, humanity stands taller. The story reminds us that true justice does not begin with power, wealth, or good intentions. It begins with seeing another human being as equal in dignity. A child's simple act of kindness reveals how easily society dehumanizes the vulnerable, and how rare it is to be treated as just a person when status is stripped away. The lesson is clear. Real change does not come from grand gestures or charity that seeks control, but from humility, consistency, and the courage to stand with others when there is nothing to gain. Kindness is not proven by what we give when it is easy, but by what we choose to do when no one is watching and no reward is promised. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.